Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Patience of Karma, Madeline Dawkins, Book 5 by Cynthia Hamilton, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Have I told you how drop-dead gorgeous you look today? Madeline tore her eyes away from her side window and lolled her head in Mike's direction, smirking at his heavy-handed flattery. Not in the last 5 minutes, she flashed him a smile before turning her attention to her cell phone. She was grateful for the diversion from the disturbing thoughts that had been hounding her for months. Though she made a conscious effort to blot out her ex-husband's most recent attempt on her life and his subsequent disappearance from his work-release program, random occurrences would spark memories that set her mind racing down a dark hole. As much as Mike and the district attorney tried to persuade her that Stephen was too invested in his stolen freedom to come after her again, she knew with every fiber of her being that she had not heard the last of him yet. Stephen craved revenge as much as he craved money and power. Getting inside her head and staying there fed his ego and his sense of control, in addition to meting out punishment for blowing his cushy position with the California Department of Corrections, itself a grotesque mockery of the judicial system. The only way she could combat the threat he posed was to remain vigilant and pretend he no longer existed. Most of the time, that worked. Still feeling Mike's gaze on her face, she glanced up at the stoplight. "It's green," she pointed out. A horn sounded behind them as her phone chimed with an incoming text. Mike hit the gas and glided her Audi SUV through the left turn up Chapala Street. "Oh, this is nice," she announced in mild astonishment as she read her most recent message. "Looks like we might pick up a new client thanks to Sherry Alexander of all people." That name from the past conjured up lots of memories for Mike, none of them very pleasant. He was surprised by Madeline's enthusiasm for the referral, especially considering her love-hate relationship with the event side of her enterprises. "Another Hollywood big shot," Mike speculated, cynicism seeping into his nonchalant delivery. "Probably, but he's inquiring about a private matter, not a gala." "Oh." Mike's face brightened at that thought. "I imagine that could be a nice client pool for us if word keeps spreading through that crowd." Madeline had to laugh knowing how true that was. Word of mouth and the promise of discretion were endorsements that couldn't be bought, but they were definitely major selling points, especially among the elite. "I'll give him a call once I check him out online," she said just before a new missive appeared on her screen, this one from Samir. "We've got a walk-in," Madeline informed her partner as he pulled into the public parking lot behind their office building. "A missing person case." "Hot damn, it must be 2 for Tuesday," he quipped, earning a chuckle from his partner in all things. "Samir says the man needs help finding his nephew." Madeline turned toward Mike with raised eyebrows. She let Samir know they'd be right up. The text left with a whoosh as Mike pulled into one of their assigned parking spaces up behind their building. Madeline had her seatbelt off and her hand poised to open the door when Mike caught her attention. "Hold on, looks like you've got a smudge or something right below your bottom lip." "Where?" She reached for the visor so she could look for herself. "Turn towards me." Mike leaned in, his face fastened on his target. Instead of wiping away a smudge, his finger drew her chin closer as he moved in for a kiss. "Sneaky," Madeline said after the short but sweet kiss, not even trying to hide her smug pleasure at being so in love and happily married for 4 months, 9 days, and 18 hours. Mike shrugged nonchalantly before taking another lunge at her, which she eluded on her way out the door. In a sedan parked in an aisle perpendicular to the row of tenant parking spaces, a man wielding a digital camera took a series of close-up shots as Mike emerged from the Audi and turned his direction. For the sake of thoroughness, he kept clicking as Mike caught up with his bride and threw his left arm around her shoulder before the pair disappeared into an alleyway. The man flicked through the photos before forwarding them to his client. "I believe this is the Mike Delaney you're looking for. I'll send the written report now." He sent his client the report containing all the information he'd used to track Mike down and everything he'd unearthed about him, including the URL for the company he co-owned with his wife. Knowing he had plenty of time left on his 75-minute free parking, he checked his messages while he waited for the client's reply. It didn't take long. "Thank you. Anything else you want me to do at this point?" "No, just send me your bill. I think I have what I need." Chapter 2. Samir had just handed the prospective client a cup of coffee and was making polite chit-chat when his bosses entered the reception area. The man seeking their help set the mug on the side table next to a manila envelope and got to his feet. He stood a couple inches shy of Mike's 6'3", but his wide shoulders and square build gave him an advantage over Mike in the weight department. Sandy hair verging on gray framed his rugged face, and his eyes were alert and kind. Mike reached out his hand as he drew closer. "Mike Delaney, and this is my wife Madeline. She's really the brains behind our operations." He released the strong, sinewy hand, a hand that had likely seen many years of physical labor or outdoor recreation. "Webb Bernhardt," he offered, gently taking Madeline's extended hand as if it were a fragile heirloom, a gesture not lost on her. "Thanks for seeing me. I guess I should have called to make an appointment." "It's okay. You caught us at the right time." Mike motioned for Bernhardt to follow Madeline's lead. Once in the conference room, Madeline handed off her tote to Samir before taking a seat on the far side of the table. Mike pulled out the chair on the end while Bernhardt took a seat across from Madeline. "Samir told us you're looking for help tracking down your nephew," Mike offered as he leaned back in his chair. "That's right. I need to find my sister's son, Daniel Billings. He hasn't been in contact with anyone in the family since his mom passed away 5 years ago." Webb Bernhardt removed an enlarged photo from the manila envelope and slid it across the table to Madeline. She examined the cocky-looking surf rat, early 20s, bare-chested and wiry, grinning like he'd just snagged the biggest wave on record. "That was taken at my sister's house about 3 years before her death. Daniel left Fort Lauderdale to sail around the world with 2 buddies shortly after that. He spent a few years wandering the globe, then landed in the Pacific Northwest, and as far as we knew, he had stayed there. To be honest, after my sister passed away, I didn't really keep tabs on Danny's whereabouts. He bounced around a lot and didn't check in with his family very often. He did show up for his mom's funeral, but he took off right after the service, before anyone really had a chance to talk to him." Madeline slid the photo to Mike, having committed Daniel's features to memory. Mike took a cursory glance at Daniel's likeness before asking, "Why the sudden interest in finding him?" After silent deliberation, Webb sat forward, planting his elbows on the table, hands clutched together tightly as if he were wrestling with what he was about to say. Both detectives took note of the discomfort the simple question had provoked. Their interest piqued. Webb leaned back in his chair and drew in a deep breath, cautious eyes assessing the detectives before he laid out his cards. "I'll get to the reason, but first I need to give you a little background info." Webb took a sip of coffee before he began, another stalling tactic that upped Madeline's curiosity. She reached for a pen and a notepad in the center of the table and began to make notes. "About a year and a half ago, the Coast Guard came across a cabin cruiser off the coast of San Diego that appeared to be unmanned and drifting aimlessly. After boarding the vessel, they discovered the bodies of 2 men, both of them local. The cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning." Mike and Madeline exchanged sidelong glances as they silently speculated where this story was headed. Once the discovery was announced, 2 individuals came forward claiming they saw 3 men on board the boat right before it left the harbor. Prompted by their statements, the Coast Guard did a more thorough investigation of the contents taken from the boat and found items pointing to a 3rd passenger, a cell phone not registered to the 2 victims, and a duffel bag full of clothing later found to have hairs on it not belonging to either of the deceased men. Red hairs, like Daniel's. The Coast Guard had enough reason to suspect a 3rd victim had awoken before he was asphyxiated, pushed his way out of the cabin, and accidentally went overboard while trying to catch his breath. They conducted an extensive search for the missing man, but after the delay, it wasn't surprising a body was never recovered. Area hospitals and local morgues were checked, but no one fitting Daniel's description was ever brought in. Webb Bernhardt shifted uncomfortably in his chair, propping an elbow on the table as he delivered the clincher. Fingerprints lifted from the cell phone were a match for Daniel's. He'd gotten busted for pot when he was 19, so his prints were in the national database. The phone was also registered in his name. The Coast Guard tracked down his next of kin, and his sister Layla is the one who got the call. Daniel was presumed dead due to accidental drowning, possibly as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. Mike took a moment to digest all of this. "So, what makes you think Daniel is still alive?" he asked, his eyes trained on Bernhardt's. Webb broke eye contact with Mike and pulled another image from the manila envelope. "A couple weeks ago, I was planning a trip to California for my wife's birthday. I was doing a hotel search in Santa Barbara, and you know how when you do a search for a particular area, you get all kinds of things popping up for services and related articles? Well, I clicked on a site and was just scrolling down when I came across this photo." Webb looked briefly at the enlarged print taken from a screenshot before he slid it across the table to Madeline. He waited pensively for her reaction. The location was immediately recognizable. The photo had been shot down at the foot of State Street in front of the dolphin sculpture marking the entrance to Stearns Wharf. It appeared to have been taken during one of Santa Barbara's yearly festivals. It captured a trio of extravagantly costumed dancers mid-step surrounded by onlookers. In the background, facing in the direction of the camera, stood a man who looked to be in his late 20s, his attention focused on the spectacle playing out in front of him. Webb Bernhardt had drawn a circle around the subject in black ink. Because Madeline had been expecting to see a thin redhead, it wouldn't have been hard to pick him out of the small crowd. She passed the photo to Mike. To underscore his point, Webb slid the first photo next to the screenshot so both detectives could see the obvious similarities. The man in the Stearns Wharf photo had seen more wear and tear, but the fiery hair, high cheekbones, and prominent nose were easily discernible. Mike snuck a quick glance at his partner before voicing what they were both thinking. This photo is what made you travel out here from Fort Lauderdale. From Fort Lauderdale on a hunch that your nephew might still be alive? The nephew you haven't been in contact with for several years? The look on Webb Bernhardt's face said he had anticipated Mike's skepticism. I know this must seem a little desperate, but to tell you the truth, I am desperate. Bernhardt sucked in a deep breath and let it wheeze out before laying his cards on the table. 4 months ago, my niece Layla, Daniel's sister, was diagnosed with end-stage chronic kidney disease. She's wasted away to nothing, and we've had no luck finding a suitable kidney donor. There have been 5 potential candidates, me being one of them, but so far her body's created strong antibodies to all the donors' HLA antigens, including mine. That's just a technical way of saying her body would probably reject those kidneys. There are other factors that I won't go into, but at this stage, Layla's doctors are very concerned. Her weight has dropped to a dangerous slow. She's nothing but skin and bones. Soon she'll be too ill to receive a new kidney. The last time I saw her, I didn't even recognize her. Bernhardt shifted in his chair, his disclosure clearly making him feel vulnerable and out of his depth. Despite his obvious discomfort, he pushed on. If, and I know there's no guarantee, but if Daniel is still alive, he might be Layla's best hope for survival. She's got 2 young girls, 5 and 8, so there's a lot riding on finding a compatible donor. Bernhardt wagged his head, a tight smile doing little to hide his anxiety as he rested his forearms on the table and leaned forward, his countenance unguarded as he looked at each detective in turn, the plea in his eyes unmistakable. So there you have it. I know this is a long shot, but I felt like I had to take it, he said as he pushed back against the chair, dropping his gaze to the envelope in front of him, his fingers nervously tapping out a tense rhythm. Mike and Madeline traded unspoken thoughts, each coming to the conclusion they were on the same page. Just so you don't think I've let desperation skew my judgment, Bernhardt added, I did run these photos through a facial recognition app, and they came up as a match. That was reason enough for me to pursue this thing. I know the odds are against me, but finding Daniel might be the only way to save Layla's life. Mike looked over at his partner, meeting her gaze and holding it for a beat. It was now up to them to either give the stranger off the street their assistance in finding his nephew, or turn him down so he could look elsewhere for help. There were other investigators out there who'd be happy to take Bernhardt's money, but that didn't mean they'd have any better luck finding someone who'd cut his ties with the past and now apparently floated through life like a ghost. What it came down to was their willingness to commit their time and resources to such an iffy case. Knowing they had another potential case added a little pressure to the situation. Let me make sure I'm understanding this situation correctly, Madeline began. Bernhardt's eyes fastened onto hers while Mike studied his features, looking for anything that might hint an ulterior motive. There's been no contact between Daniel and his sister, or you, or anyone else in your family since your sister's memorial 5 years ago. That's correct. You believe the guy in the photo is your nephew, and you want to find him to see if he'd be willing to give up a kidney to save a sibling he hasn't spoken to in years, regardless of the fact he has never bothered to let his family know he's still alive. Though Madeline was merely trying to verify what the potential client was hoping to accomplish by hiring them, her summations put a more dubious spin on what they were up against. Yes, that's basically what it comes down to. She slid both photos over to her again, studied them side by side, trying to glean something resembling clues to what kind of guy they were looking for. I know the situation is next to hopeless, but I have to follow through on this. I believe the guy in the photo is Daniel, like the facial recognition software confirmed. I couldn't live with myself if I just let Layla die without trying to find him, Webb said, his deep voice tinged with pain and resignation. I found out where this photo was taken, so I began my search down by the harbor. I I didn't really believe I'd be lucky enough to find Daniel there, but I had to start somewhere. Knowing his love of the sea, I stuck to the beaches. You have a lot of beaches in this area, Webb huffed as he reflected on his futile efforts. After 2 days of walking my butt off and accosting almost everyone I came across, I realized I needed a real plan and some real help. I decided to check in with your local police department, see if they had Danny in their system or any better ideas on how to go about finding him. One of the detectives gave me your business card, said you're pretty sharp. Slovich, Madeline surmised, earning a nod of agreement from her partner. The detective had been their ally since Stephen Ridley's first attempt on Madeline's life. Do you have any idea when this photo was taken? Mike asked. Actually, that's one thing I do know. I found out it was taken at the summer solstice celebration last June by someone covering the event for one of your local free papers. Well, that's something, Mike agreed, though it gave them no indication of whether Daniel was a resident of Santa Barbara or merely one of the thousands of tourists attracted to the pagan festival that had taken place 9 months earlier. The trio sat in silence, all of them feeling the tension hovering over the confined space. Mike and Madeline prided themselves on never shying away from seemingly impossible cases if they were sympathetic to the prospective client, and it certainly didn't matter to them if they were getting paid to hunt down phantoms. What had them feeling a little squeamish was having someone's life hanging in the balance while they quite possibly spun their wheels. Being so attuned to each other, Mike knew without even consulting Madeline that she wouldn't turn her back on a case like this where the stakes were so high, no matter how daunting the odds were. Trying and not succeeding was always going to feel better to her than not having tried at all. We'd like to help you, but we need you to tell us anything and everything you can think of about Daniel, Madeline said. Bernhardt sighed as he leaned back against the chair, his relief visible as he struggled with conflicting emotions. I guess Danny's most obvious characteristic is his ability to talk to anyone. He can turn up in just about any situation and win people over just like that, Webb says, snapping his fingers. He can become your best friend in a matter of hours, but sooner or later his faults are going to start showing. Such as? Mike asked. Webb took a moment to choose his words. Since he'd freely give you the shirt off his back, he naturally assumes everyone else feels the same way. Your things become his things, and all he really has to offer are things taken from someone else. Webb leaned forward, his face averted as an old memory had him cracking a smile. Years ago, Danny borrowed a '66 Bonneville I had bought to restore. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, like a couple of weeks. I kept calling Danny, telling him I wanted the car back so I could start working on it. Sure, no problem. The car never turned up. Then one day, I was driving down the road, and I see my baby blue Bonneville with the primer on the back left panel and some other dude at the wheel. No Danny. I followed the guy until he pulled into the liquor store parking lot. Got a little confrontational, I suppose. The dude was obviously in the dark about the true ownership of the car. Claimed Danny gave it to him to settle a debt. Bernhardt leaned back, his eyes pivoting from one detective to the other before landing on Madeline. Don't get me wrong. It's been years since I've seen Danny, and I hope like hell he is still alive. Everyone can change. I do believe that, and it's possible Danny has no memory of his life before the incident on the boat. Maybe the carbon monoxide did something to his brain. I honestly don't know. But I do know I can get over a whole lot of hurt feelings if he can at least see if he's a candidate for donating a kidney to his sister. Since Madeline had already made up her mind, she didn't let Bernhardt sweat it out any longer. We can't make any promises, but we'll do everything in our power to track down your nephew, she said. Though these were the words Webb Bernhardt wanted to hear, he was acutely aware of the disclaimer built into them, the everything in our power being the catch. Hiring MDPI didn't guarantee him that Daniel would be found. That's all I can ask, he said, resignation coloring his words. He took a sip of his now cold coffee and cleared his throat. Tell me what you need to get started. Madeline's silence made it clear Mike would be the one to set a price on their time. He figured a solid day of chasing down leads and pounding the pavement by one or more of the MDPI staff would be the minimum time required. But most likely it would take several days to do a thorough investigation, canvassing the neighborhoods and scratching around for clues. Traveling down to San Diego might also be in the cards. He threw out a number that impressed Madeline without making her feel uncomfortable. Instead of producing a checkbook or a credit card, Bernhardt pulled a fat wad of $100 bills from his pocket and began counting them off without the slightest trace of reluctance. Hope cash is okay, he said, stopping mid-count to gauge the detective's reaction. Cash is fine, but in that case a $500 retainer will suffice for now. Mike crossed his arms casually in front of him, eyeing their new client askance as additional reservations regarding this case floated to the surface. Bernhardt peeled 5 bills off the top, then handed them to Madeline, a gesture that earned a smile from both detectives. Mike scooted away from the table and went to get his laptop so they could write up the contract. After getting Bernhardt's contact information and his signature on the contract, Mike told him they'd be in touch no later than the following day, regardless of their progress. "I appreciate that," Webb said with a solemn nod of thanks to both detectives before heading out of the conference room. "Tell me we did the right thing," Mike said from the doorway as he watched Bernhardt exit the reception area. "We never know how our cases are going to pan out," Madeline reminded him, "and at least 50% of them have been impossible long shots or non-starters from the outset. We just have to do our best with what we can unearth. It's what we do. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we've never failed to deliver." Mike snorted his reply, grudgingly acknowledging she was right. "Not yet, but something tells me our lucky streak may have just petered out."